He's been cancelled for his Christianity. Reverend Bernard Randall has endured a 6-year ordeal after giving a sermon advising children that they may want to question transgender ideology and gay marriage.
And the question is the United Kingdom still a Christian country?
In your own words, what do you believe and what was the sermon intended to convey?
What I believe, as regards same-sex marriage, I can't see that is compatible with Christian life. The teaching of the Church of England and Roman Catholic Church, Orthodox churches, Southern Baptists in America, the vast majority of Christians around the world, that's just the teaching. And I think that's solidly based on what the Bible says. In many ways, I'd love if it was different. I can see how difficult that is for many people in our society. And it would be really nice in many ways if we could say to them, it's all fine, actually. The teaching is not right, and you're okay doing whatever you want to do and getting married and so on. I just can't see that being a possible point of view if you take the Bible as your highest authority. And that's been the tradition of the church for 2,000 years. So there's no getting around that. But I totally accept that for many people in our society, they do want to support same-sex marriage, as is their right, and I can see the arguments in favour. I think by definition a bigot is someone who denies the possibility of a different worldview. I don't deny anybody's possible worldview. I think that Christianity is true, so I'm committed to that. But I fully recognise and respect that others have different views. And similarly, when it comes to the reality of biological sex, and to my mind, the non-reality of something called gender identity, that's my point of view, and I'm willing to argue it. But other people do believe that you can change sex and do think that people have a thing inside them which is gender identity. I'll quite happily have that discussion and that debate and respect their right to hold those beliefs. What's important is not forcing anybody to take beliefs that they really don't want to, that they feel in their conscience is not right. So the point of the sermon was to say respect people's beliefs. And it was founded on the fact that the school had a group called Educate and Celebrate, a now defunct charity, coming in and promoting gender identity, gender, sexual orientation as being necessary parts of the life of a school, which to me they're just not. I mean, teach children not to discriminate, teach children to accept different worldviews, to accept people as they are, absolutely. But that doesn't mean you need to bring sexuality into maths lessons, which was one of the things that was done. That just seems to me a bit weird. So they came in with this idea and with a 30-point programme of how the school should change things, policies and so on, to embed gender identity and sexual orientation in the life of the school, to which I took some exception because it was just all a bit too extreme. And the headline purpose of this was to smash heteronormativity. That's something that the person who came to train the staff had them chant at one point during the staff training. What do we want to do? Smash heteronormativity.
Were you in the room for that?
Oh, well, yes. Yeah, I didn't join in.
No. Because you were a school chaplain.
That's right. So I was a chaplain.
Yeah.
So my role is as the sort of spiritual and moral voice within the school specifically, and as a Church of England minister in a Church of England school, a particular care for the Christian values that we were supposed to be espousing. And I'm sorry, smashing heteronormativity is contrary to Christianity, as far as I can make out. It looks to me as if it comes straight out of queer theory, which is a sort of neo-Marxism or however people want to describe these things, but it's the sort of oppressor-oppressed narrative, the way of viewing the world. And that's not how Christians see the world, as far as I can see. And for Christians, marriage of a man and a woman as the building block of a society, producing children and so on, is just part of the deal. So in the Ten Commandments, honour your father and mother. It's right there in the middle. And it says, honour your father and mother, that your days may be long and it may go well with you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. And I take that to mean that the right ordering of family relationships is good for society as a whole. That a working society, one that will flourish in the land, has this at its heart. And given it's there in the Ten Commandments, I'm not going to argue with that.
Before we get into the detail of the backlash that you face, I just want to dig around a little more in the actual school's policy. It's difficult, I think, for some of us looking at this, thinking that this was a Church of England school. As far as you were aware, what were the school attempting to achieve by inviting Educate and Celebrate into the school, given that it was a Christian school?
I honestly don't know.
Did they share that with you beforehand? Was there a discussion before about we should bring these groups in because it's part of our, presumably, inclusion policy? There
was no inclusion policy. This is nothing written down. This was part of the difficulty. It seems to me, piecing bits and pieces together, that the impetus for inviting Educate and Celebrate came from the school's safeguarding lead, where there were homophobic comments, pupils were punished. I put pupils in detention myself for, oh, that's so gay. No, sorry, you can't say that. Unacceptable, detention. I did that. So I don't think there was a particular issue to address. But on the face of it, they sold Educate and Celebrate as anti-homophobic bullying. But it was clear to me that it was much deeper than that. So I didn't really know exactly what was going on until the training and understood how far that was being pushed. Though I had an inkling beforehand because I'd looked up the name Educate and Celebrate and thought, okay, I think I know what they're about, but wait for the training and see. And they were exactly what I thought they would be. So I went to the head and the deputy head and my line manager and said, bits of this are fine, the anti-bullying stuff, no problem at all. But other bits of it, the pushing gender identity as if it were a protected characteristic, which it's not in law, that's not acceptable. That's going to be a problem, and we need to work out how best to do this, which bits to use, which bits not to use. And they promised me, yes, fine, we'll have those conversations, and they never happened. The next I knew about it, they were announcing they were putting in the whole 30-point programme.
Wow. Trent College has given us a statement. Trent College is an inclusive community where we are proud of our commitment to support the well-being of everyone. We want every single pupil to be safe and feel understood here. But I suppose your argument, Reverend, would be you're not part of that inclusive community if you've got traditional Christian beliefs. What I think is interesting about this is you are merely making the point that Christians believe X, Y, and Z. You weren't really taking a moral position on homosexuality or transgenderism, and yet your critics seem to be suggesting that you are taking that moral position, which is interesting, isn't it? I mean, you may or may not think that homosexuality is moral or immoral. I don't know what the answer to that question is. Is it even relevant here? Because what we get into, don't we, with these sorts of cancel incidences, I'm on the moral high ground. I'm an inclusive person. You're not as inclusive as me, therefore you're a bigot. And because I don't agree with you, I'm now going to exclude you, which is completely counter.
Yes, it's only I only agree with a certain type of free speech and a certain type of inclusivity, which is completely against the whole tenets of an inclusive society. I wonder, Dr. Evan, looking back now, obviously, you've been in this awful, as you say, Kafkaesque situation for many, many years, and still it goes on. But if you were to have your time again in that moment, your critics would say you could have maybe had the sermon about Christian teachings and not actually quoted Leviticus 20:13, if a man lies with a male as with a woman, both of them have committed an abomination, they shall be put to death, their blood is upon them. If that phraseology is used, I suppose, are you giving your critics sort of ammunition to come and say you've taken a step too far, whatever your beliefs may be?
Well, I mean, to the extent that people will hear what they want to hear, then possibly. That was actually a previous sermon. That was in 2016. And I had, as I did each summer, I asked people for suggestions for things they want me to talk about in chapel, sort of Bible verses they might want me to discuss, other topics. And that verse was one that I was asked to speak about by more than one pupil, and there were several others who wanted me to address LGBT type questions. And I actually quoted that single verse in order to say, we've moved on. We don't actually believe in the death penalty, and whilst there is disagreement between many or most Christians and much of the rest of society, that doesn't mean that you can impose these views. And I was trying to explain why Christians end up in the place that they do on same-sex marriage. So I specifically said, I can't remember the exact wording, but we've moved on. We don't believe that anymore. You know, we don't execute people over their sexuality. So if people want to take that and say, well, yes, you said this, well, A, I'm quoting the Bible, that should be allowed, whatever the verse, but B, in context, I said basically the opposite of what they're accusing me of saying. And it's somewhat disappointing, but it's very much part of the world we live in, that people will take stuff out of context for their own sort of political purposes.
It's interesting, isn't it, that actually the sermon that you give ends up having been prompted by a pupil saying, can you explain how come we are told that we have to accept all this LGBT stuff in a Christian school? So there's a degree
You could almost hear the teenager voice coming.
Hang on, sir. Hang on a minute. So there's clearly a huge amount of curiosity about this among the pupils.
Yes.
We also want children to be able to explore these themes as widely as possible. A child should be able to say to you, as a member of the church, you know, I'm gay, can I still be a Christian? Or, alternatively, say, I'm a Christian, I don't know if I support gay marriage. Is that allowed? And just have these debates. Again, we're not engendering children to say offensive, mean, bullying, discriminatory things. The Leviticus thing reminds me of that famous scene in The West Wing. I don't know if you're familiar with it,
I think
Reverend,
I've seen it.
but it's where Jed Bartlett, played by Martin Sheen, is challenged by Christian fundamentalists in the White House, and they quote, you know, man should not lie alongside man, woman should not lie alongside woman. And Bartlett is a Christian himself, but he says, look, a lot of the Bible is out of date. The Bible suggests that we should be stoning people and things. It's completely ridiculous. How do you counter that narrative? Because children will have watched such memes. They will be confused about how you align Christianity in 2025 with transgenderism, non-binary, all of these things that they're subjected to on social media and beyond, in their own schools, among their own friends. How do you deal with that?
I think most importantly, you allow people to have the conversation. You allow people to have the discussion rather than saying, oh no, we can't do that. It might slightly upset somebody to raise a point of view that they don't agree with, and so we're not going to allow any discussion there. If you don't open it up, then you are dealing with repression, and repressing things is not a good idea, I would say. Broadly speaking, as regards things like sexuality, much of the Old Testament law has been removed, the food laws and such like. The New Testament is very clear that much of that is done away with. However, when the New Testament effectively repeats the idea, the moral principle, if not the specific crime and penalty aspect of it, then you have to take that seriously. It's not enough simply to say, well, that was the Old Testament, times have moved on. If we believe, as Christians, that Jesus is God, if we believe that the teaching of Jesus is therefore from God, if we believe that he taught his apostles, his disciples, to follow his ways and taught them what that looked like, then what's contained in the New Testament has to be still binding on us today. Or we're saying God just randomly changes his mind to suit 21st century moral sentiment, which seems unlikely. Why does he suddenly like the 21st century's moral sentiment, not the 19th century's moral sentiment, or the 12th century's moral sentiment? Or that doesn't seem to me to work. So we have to say, as Christians, and if you're not a Christian, this doesn't particularly apply to you, as Christians, these are the viewpoints, the morals, the values that we try to live by. And we know that's very difficult for a lot of people. And it's difficult for everyone over all sorts of things. It is simply a fact that almost every human being has experienced lust which is not directed towards a husband or wife. That's just a fact of human existence. We don't say, well, this applies to some people and not others. We say it applies to everybody. How then do we deal with that? And if you think about the swinging 60s, free love is one way of dealing with it. And Christians would want to say, no, that's not biblical, that's not going to work. And then you look at people's experiences of free love, and they, as far as I can make out, are pretty uniformly negative, apart possibly from the Hugh Hefners of the world, who are right at the top of the pile. Everybody else suffers, and particularly women, I think, suffer, because they are treated like objects by men who can, because they've got the wealth or the power or the status to do that. And a Christian sexual ethic says, no, we're not objects. And it says, actually, the most important thing about us is not sex and sexuality. It's something much more profound. It's our relationship with Jesus and how we get to the Father through him. Everything else needs to be adapted around that, rather than adapting the relationship with Jesus around the things that we want or desire to do.
Let's move on from the faith issues,
Sure,
which we've been talking through, onto maybe the more legal and backlash that you then faced once this happened. Just talk us through what happened. You've spoken about your lack of support from the Church of England, particularly your local bishop. But what then happened to get you into a tribunal situation and this endless and often appalling legal journey that you've been on ever since?
Yeah, well, when I gave the sermon, there was a backlash from certain members of staff, and the safeguarding lead principal among them, it seems, though others in the senior leadership. And so I ended up getting sacked for gross misconduct for, as far as I could see, simply doing my job in accordance with my job description. I was reinstated by the governors on appeal, much to, I think, everybody's surprise, but with a list of conditions which included censorship of all sermons by the deputy head, who's not a practicing Christian as far as I can tell, and not being allowed to mention anything anywhere in school that might cause offence to anybody, which is crazy,
Yeah.
and having to support, what was the phrase, I think support and nurture. Nurture was definitely in there, all beliefs, both inside and outside chapel, which appears to mean all beliefs apart from traditional Christian understandings, but would also require me to support Muslim, Hindu, atheist, presumably racist and homophobic beliefs as well, because it just said all beliefs. When I asked them what they actually meant by that, the answer I got was, the meaning is clear. We're not going to tell you. And the meaning was clear, don't talk about Christianity. And I was not allowed to speak for more than 5 minutes in chapel. Silly stuff.
This is not
really.
Kafkaesque, this is Soviet, isn't it?
Well, yes.
You will only have good think.
Yes.
Well, I tell you
Reverend.
what is Soviet. I'm just reading here as well, Reverend, that you were also reported, as well as being sacked for gross misconduct, and you talked about being reinstated. While this was going on, you were reported without your knowledge to the government's anti-terrorism programme. I take it that was PREVENT.
That's PREVENT, yeah.
As a violent religious extremist for safeguarding issues. Funnily enough, they found that there was, quotes, no counter-terrorism risk or risk of radicalisation.
strange that. I mean, the Church of England is many things, but it's not a terrorist organisation.
I'm sorry, but I think we do need to... Sometimes when I hear these stories, I think to myself, I mean, there are moments where you do step up and you say, hang on a minute, you know, if you were some complete radical nutter, I don't know, like being really misogynistic, saying something really old school, well, I'm a Christian and I don't think any of the women in this school should be working, and if you're a girl, go home and make dinner for your father and your brothers and all that, you know, we could maybe start raising serious complaints. Imagine going to the extent of referring a reverend to prevent simply because he had said that perhaps the beliefs of educate and
celebrate
are not consistent with Christianity.
And to imagine that person is a terror threat, it's almost beyond consideration. But
Yeah.
Reverend, take us through, because not only did that happen to you, and as you say, you were reinstated with these bizarre conditions, which frankly were there to ensure you failed, one
Yes.
would assume, because that's how
Felt
the
like
system can work. I think, Camilla, we're getting to this situation, aren't we? We interviewed Dr. David Bell, who was one of the whistleblowers at the gender reassignment
Yeah.
clinic at Tavistock, in the Tavistock Clinic in London. And he said that many parts of sort of public institutions, including education, were seized by a sort of ideology that went madder and madder and became more and more purist
Yes.
in how it saw the world around it. But what I'm still struggling to understand is, how did the employment tribunal system that you went through, it seemed to have also been infected with this idea that you were some form of threat in your job and should not be reinstated without conditions?
Yes, I mean, it's a bit of a puzzle because, well, we took the school to a employment tribunal alleging discrimination, harassment, victimisation, and so on. And the tribunal found against me.
Because there is actually a protected characteristic, which is religion, i.e. you can be discriminated against
Yes,
upon
absolutely.
religion. So you are able to use that part of the equality law to take a case against the school.
That's right. And I felt that the ruling against me was clearly wrong, not just as a matter of law and the technicalities of it, but in terms of how it viewed the case. It looked like bias. You know, that one of the things was that they said it was inappropriate to use persuasive language, like "you may believe," which is a bit weird. And to say that you can't in a sermon say "you may believe," I mean, I should have been able to say "you should believe," because it's a Christian school, I'm a Christian preacher, whatever. It was that sort of level, and it quoted 20 or 30 words of the sermon altogether. The sermon, which was
presumably
at the heart of the whole case,
including Leviticus, and one assumes.
that previous
Oh, that was
sermon
the
it
previous
mentioned
one,
that,
yes.
yeah. But the sermon that caused the actual trouble in 2019. So we get a couple of dozen words of that in a 70-odd page judgment. They quoted at length, paragraph after paragraph of other documents, but didn't quote in depth the actual sermon which was at the heart of it, which seems to me a clear indication that they knew that if they put that there, they couldn't then get around the fact that it's pretty bland when all's said and done, that it was encouraging respect for people. You know, I said about 6 times, respect the people you disagree with. I couldn't have been much clearer on that, I don't think.
So pardon the expression, but they kind of tried to sex up your sermon
Yeah.
for purposes of the judgment.
Well, but Judge Victoria Butler dismissed your claim in 2022, saying that you, Reverend Randall, takes an extreme view of educate and celebrate, which bears no resemblance to reality of its purpose and implementation, which was aimed simply at creating an inclusive environment for all. How did you respond to that?
Well, that's one part of this 70-odd pages that I also just couldn't understand. I'm befuddled by that. I gave clear evidence for my view of it. And what was interesting was when the school's witnesses were talking about what Educate and Celebrate was for, their effective answer was, we don't know. We didn't really understand it ourselves. The chant smash heteronormativity, well, it was a bit cringeworthy.
Yes.
Well, you may or may not genuinely have thought that at the time. But if you did think that at the time, why did you then decide to put in place the whole programme rather than listening to the chaplain, who was saying there are some difficulties with this, we need to pick and choose. Some of those 30 points are fine, some of them not so much. Let's work it out.
But it was symptomatic of the period, which was swallow, hook, line and sinker, anything with a rainbow flag on, in the same vein that we all had to adopt BLM, Black Lives Matter. Suddenly it's on the masthead. Someone's come in. I mean, it should be pointed out. I'm just going to say this as an aside because this court case is still ongoing. Just to add another dimension in all of this, we've got the school basically taking as gospel, pardon the expression,
that's quite right,
educate and celebrate. And then something quite extraordinary happens when we reflect on this entire case, actually. Because educate and celebrate suddenly goes off the radar and nobody can quite understand why. Then it emerges that it has closed itself down. Then it emerges that its patron, a man called Stephen Ireland, has been charged with offences, including rape of a child, and he's found guilty. So we have this going on in the background while you continue to be cancelled for delivering a sermon advocating Christianity as a Christian clergyman. Had it caused you to question your faith at any point?
Not my faith, certainly question the Church of England and my place in the specific church. But no, it doesn't question faith. And in some ways it makes you feel stronger because what I've been through has been certainly challenging. But Jesus says, take up your cross daily and follow me. And sometimes actually when you're forced to take up a cross you never imagined you'd take, you realise, oh yes, actually I am willing to do this. I am willing to walk that walk. So it sort of confirms the faith as much as it challenges it in a strange sort of way.
There are many astonishing legal aspects to the story, which I think we should get into in a moment.
Yep.
But one of the things reading into the background to this remarkable case that really struck me was the fact, and you've just touched on it there, that the Church of England didn't stand behind you, given that they are the established church and we are, the last time I looked, an Anglican country.
That's right. Well, yes, Anglican country are we? It's an interesting question.
Well, maybe we'll get onto that as well.
We could go there.
But, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that's in many ways been the hardest. I mean, losing my job at the school, which is a church school in its foundation, that was pretty bad. But not to have anybody in the hierarchy of the Church of England, specifically my bishop, whose job it is to be pastor to the pastors, not to have her give any kind of support, not to have anybody say to me, well, this is all a bit rough, we'll do our best to look after you. On the contrary, when I gave the fateful sermon at the school saying you may believe the Church of England's teachings on marriage and the reality of sex and so on, and there was a fairly significant backlash from certain members of staff. I mean, I think most were perfectly happy, but the Bishop of Derby apologised to the school for my behaviour, as far as I can tell, before she'd even read the sermon. So before she knew what I'd done, she was leaping in with an apology, and that feels pretty, well, disappointing is a mild way to put it. But
and then that lack of standing with you seemed to go right up to now the former Archbishop Justin Welby.
That's right. I made a formal complaint about the way I'd been treated, specifically by the bishop, because there isn't a mechanism for complaining about anybody else's part in the what's gone on. Though I would recognise the bishop isn't the person most responsible for the worst of it, but she has overall oversight of the whole thing. So I made a formal complaint, and that got quite a long way, somewhat in the face of resistance from Justin Welby, who tried to dismiss it. I think that's probably not personal. I think that's just a case of any time a complaint is made against a bishop, the archbishop bats it away because they protect rather than seeking justice. I mean, many complaints probably are trivial and should be denied, but that mine had enough substance to it, and a senior church legal officer said there was enough substance to it, but it was still batted away. And when that complaint failed, there was a petition to Justin Welby, signed by sort of 40,000 people, to reinstate me and to see things put right. And he didn't do that. Now, perhaps by coincidence, the day that we went and took the petition to Lambeth Palace, Justin Welby resigned. So I don't think it's my fault that he went. But anyway, that's he could have intervened, and I can see politically why he wouldn't. But for someone whose ministry was substantially built on the ministry of reconciliation and mediating between warring tribes in Africa or whatever, not to be able to do something there was a shame.
Also, your kind of pariah status when you consider that the Church of England was asleep at the wheel when members of the clergy were actually abusing children.
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to be found guilty of whataboutery, but it seems disproportionate how you have been treated compared to other members of the cloth.
Yes, I feel that way. It is a tricky one, isn't it? But too many clergy, I don't know about plenty, too many clergy have been guilty of clear and obvious genuine abuse, sexual abuse and other kinds. In the paperwork relating to my case from the Derby safeguarding team, it specifically says there's no evidence that Reverend Randall has behaved inappropriately towards anybody. And they say it's just about the sermon. So there really is no safeguarding issue as far as I can see, as far as anyone's been able to say to me. There's no evidence of abusive behaviour. If giving a sermon saying you may agree with the church's teaching is somehow abusive, then every member of the clergy up and down the land ought to be subject to safeguarding investigations. That's the worst thing I did, is give a sermon.
So you are found against initially by
Yes.
the Employment Tribunal and Judge Victoria Butler. You then appeal that, and then to layer on another astonishing chapter of this story, Judge James Taylor, who hears that appeal last month, orders a retrial because of, quotes, appearance of bias in the first tribunal's panel, because one of the members of that tribunal, a chap called Jed Purkis, had posted on social media clearly a position which was described as anti-Christian.
So you're waiting now for another employment tribunal.
Yes.
In the meantime, you've not been able to give a sermon or been able to work in the Christian ministry ever since. You're still blacklisted for safeguarding issues by the Church of England.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got quite an illustrious history here. You were a chaplain at Christ College, Cambridge. You had been working, in schools for quite some time. That was your profession as well as your calling. What on earth, how have you survived for the last 6 years? What work have you done?
I've been fortunate to get a job in basically adult education. I won't say where exactly because I don't want them to experience a pile-on, because you know how these things can go sometimes.
Sure. But they looked at all this and said, look, we'll have you, we'll support you.
Well, they didn't know when I made the application.
Fair
because
enough.
I was made redundant by the school.
Sure.
But subsequently they know everything, and I haven't hidden anything. And they have said, well, you did nothing wrong, so
Great.
You're fine.
All
so
right.
that's been great.
There's still some common sense in the world.
There is some, yeah. It's part-time. It's not what I want to be doing, and reduced circumstances, but enough to pay the bills.
What do you hope to get back to, Reverend?
This is a really good question. I would love to get back into ministry. If the Church of England can sort its act out and realise that teaching the Church's teaching is not a crime. What exactly that looks like, I don't know. I really enjoyed being a school chaplain. It'd be lovely to think I could get back to that. But after all that's happened, in fairness, it would be a brave head teacher who offered me a position. And, it's been 5 years since I've given a sermon. So when it comes to giving references, when they typically say, give a reference for someone who's known your work and ministry over the last 3 years, I can't give a single person because I simply don't have that. So potentially I have to go right back to the beginning and start in the most lowly sort of apprentice minister role. And I feel I have a bit more to offer than that. And, I'm not getting any younger. I'd like to do something a bit more substantial. But
it must have been hard not being able to preach. I mean, I would imagine that's the point of wearing the dog collar.
Yes, and I wear the collar when I'm doing things like this or public facing, almost as a reminder to myself. I still can. They can't take away the fact that I'm ordained. They can stop me ministering, but they can't take away that I am a minister. And I hope to get back to it. But yeah, it's difficult because I go to church and I've had to change church because the one I was going to in the Church of England, I wasn't getting reasonable support. I didn't feel comfortable. I wasn't unsafe. It's not about safe spaces or whatever, but it just didn't feel comfortable. And in a sense, almost as if me being there was a rebuke to the clergy themselves. And that's not fair for them. They're only subject to the bishop themselves. So I've had to change church. And there I am sitting in the pews, as it were, wishing I could be up at the front doing those things that I'd like to think I'm quite good at. That certainly the church, by ordaining me, has recognised that call and recognised those aptitudes. And it's the church itself saying, despite the fact that we recognise this is the right thing for you, we're not going to let you do it. And that's painful if I think about it too much.
The Church of England has failed you, has it not?
I think it has. Yeah. I don't think there's any other way of putting it. I mean, I get slightly twitchy about people saying the Church of England as if it's one organisation. Actually, there's no such thing as the Church of England. It's a collection of dioceses and parishes and sort of a voluntary association of these disparate things. There is no centre, strictly speaking, though you wouldn't believe that listening to Justin Welby and the others.
But those in power,
those
in
particular positions, and particularly the Diocese of Derby, and there have been other people who could have stepped in to help and to, at the very least, mediate some kind of way through the thicket, rather than just putting up walls and saying, well, no, once there's a safeguarding thing, even though we know you've done nothing inappropriate ever, even though we know it's just a sermon, once that has got started, it feels as if there's no one able to say, come on, bit of common sense.
Yeah, it's the word safeguarding. It implies something really dodgy has happened, when in fact you've just expressed beliefs. Do we know yet who is likely to replace Justin Welby?
Absolutely no idea.
No, because I would imagine that the next Archbishop could perhaps decide your fate when it comes to your future in the church.
Potentially. Again, it would need to be someone with a certain amount of backbone to say, I know the word safeguarding is attached to this, but actually it's just not safeguarding. But the church and many institutions have sort of backed themselves into a corner by saying safeguarding is the most vitally important thing in the world. And it is really, really important. It must be done properly, but it must be done properly, not abused for, as it seems to me, theological reasons, and not in a sense that just one accusation, one person saying, oh, I think there's a safeguarding problem, cannot be supervised by anyone. Where is the accountability for the safeguarding officers? The Church of England wants to have independent safeguarding. I think it's right that should happen in due course. But who is going to say to the safeguarding officer, I think you're making a mistake here? Where is the mechanism for that? And at the moment, that just doesn't exist. The safeguarding officer's opinion is treated as gospel.
Yes.
You asked a pretty fundamental question at the beginning of our conversation, which is almost how seriously, or what is the status of Christianity in the United Kingdom? I just wondered if I could ask you to answer that question. Do we remember that we are a Christian country? And is in some way Christianity not seen as being on a level which other beliefs are?
It's really difficult, and I suspect it depends whom you ask. If you talk to someone from the liberal metropolitan elite, they will probably say, oh, don't be foolish, of course we're not a Christian country anymore, we've moved on from all of that stuff. If you go out into the shires and counties and talk to farmers, or if you go into a lot of our towns and cities and talk to ordinary working people and say, is England a Christian country? I think you get far more of them saying yes. And they wouldn't necessarily be able to explain exactly what that means, but they would think, well, we have our local parish church and we like it being there, particularly in the villages. You know, that it is still a focus of something about what it means to be English.
But the liberal establishment, the metropolitan liberal establishment, don't seem to understand that.
I don't think they do. And I would love to think that the next archbishop would not be part of that establishment. No. For me, ideally, it should be someone who isn't yet a bishop, someone who's just semi-detached from all of the sort of the establishment stuff that has been going on and to a lot of people's minds going wrong in the church lately, and someone who will simply get back to, yeah, we are a church for the people, amongst the people, in our parishes up and down the land, and we'll stop talking about the centre, and you know, there must never again be, a spokesman for the Church of England said, there should be no such thing, because who appointed that spokesman? Who told that person what to say?
Too political, hasn't it? The Church of England is
too political and too managed. I think Justin Welby's greatest failing, from my mind, is that he's a manager, and he brought managerialism right into the heart of Lambeth Palace and Church House in Westminster, in a way that it was creeping that way anyway, but he sort of, I think, has accelerated it. And I think we need someone to, dare I say it, sack everybody in Church House Westminster and just get rid of the whole thing, and let it be the diocese and the parishes being faithful Christians again. That would be my prescription. Whether it's even remotely sensible, probably not.
Just going to look for a quick survey about young people and Christianity, so I'm not being rude.
Yeah.
I think you're being too generous to Justin Welby. It wasn't just that he was managerial, he was far too opinionated. He excluded people from the church by saying things like, I'm against the Rwanda scheme. Well, what about your parishioners who are for the Rwanda scheme? You know, I saw him at an event at the Spectator magazine. He was quite disparaging towards the Telegraph and what we write and what we believe. And I thought, well, how exclusive of you. You should be including people of all views. So I think you're being quite charitable towards Welby. He became far too political. And let's be honest, his exit from the church and his mishandling of John Smythe, what was the phrase he used? He wasn't quite across it. Well, you're in charge. You're vicariously responsible for all this stuff. So I think you're being too too Christian in your approach to him, to be honest.
That's a terrible
That's maybe why you're a lapsed Catholic, Camilla.
I think it probably is, yeah.
I think that his mistake is thinking that there is a party line, rather than saying we're a church of all sorts of different beliefs and opinions on political matters. Hopefully we all follow Jesus as Lord. All the other stuff is just fluff and flummery, and we're not going to worry about it. I think he worried too much about what it looked like to people in Westminster. And those are the wrong people to be impressing. I think it's God we're supposed to be impressing. I may be mistaken in that, but if I am, there goes 2,000 years of Christian tradition.
That was one figure that I had seen recently, Reverend, which I thought was interesting. Bible sales up 87% in the UK between 2019 and 2024. And then another survey revealing that although funny enough, Gen Z have a tendency to be less atheist than their elders, but at the same time don't want to be associated with the prescribed religion.
Yes.
I mean, do you have a sense, perhaps this was what the sermon was about, that you feel a generation may have lost their way? Maybe you have a view on the sort of prevalence of social media, a degree of narcissism, a degree of nihilism among younger people. Maybe they could do with the guidance of the church.
Well,
or the synagogue, or the mosque, or anywhere else.
I think they could do with spiritual and moral guidance, but then I would say that, wouldn't I? But yes, I think we are living in a culture which has become incredibly shallow.
Yes.
You can have all the knowledge in the world, but there's no wisdom to be found out there, not really. And people crave meaning and purpose in their lives, and they want to know what they're doing makes a difference. I mean, I think this is why Jordan Peterson has been such a phenomenon, that he wants to say, pick up some purpose and some meaning and get out there and live your life according to that. And that resonates with an awful lot of people. It's astonishing to me that Jordan Peterson can fill arenas full of young people, and the Archbishop of Canterbury could barely fill a 100-seater room.
But then there can be a more pernicious side to that, which is that young people, and particularly boys and teenagers, turn to somebody like Andrew Tate for his preachings on life and women and wealth.
Indeed, but actually that itself is also terribly shallow. So where we have a sense of mystery, the deeply profound spiritual sense of something so much bigger than we are ourselves, and we can connect people to that, we have something in the church that the world simply doesn't have, doesn't comprehend. And I think that's profoundly attractive. And I think that the Bible sales and other indications are that young people have a sense that the world is not just shallow, that there is, what does it mean to be a human being, has this incredibly deep answer to it. We're not just a bag of mostly water. We're not just a flesh robot, whatever the things that people say. We are so much more. People instinctively, I think, know that. And if the churches, and synagogues and mosques, I dare say, but particularly I'm interested in the churches, could get back to that sense of we are not a managed organisation. We are a collection of people talking about these profound, deep meanings and how that connects to the meaning. I don't know if we'd be filling churches, but we'd do a darn sight better than we've been doing lately.
Whether you have a faith or do not have a faith or don't believe you have a faith, isn't this also been a journey about freedom of expression, about the ability to talk about your beliefs, and that this country should back freedom of expression?
I think so. I mean, the sermon repeatedly said, make up your own mind. No one has the right to tell you what you can believe. No one has the right to tell you what you must say. And then, ironically, the conditions imposed on me very much did tell me what I'm allowed to believe and what I'm allowed to say. And I think that's of vital importance to a flourishing society. If we don't have freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, then we cannot grow and develop as individuals. We cannot grow and develop as a society. And you look at societies around the world and down through history which have repressed freedoms, totalitarian regimes of whatever kind, and you have the Great Leap Forward, which killed however many tens of millions in China, and the killing fields of Cambodia, and so on.
Soviet Russia.
And I would rather avoid that if it's all okay to you. Thanks very much. That's not the way to run a society. And if allowing freedom of speech and freedom of conscience is a little uncomfortable for some people, then actually what we need to do is to say to those people, it's okay. It doesn't stop you being you. It doesn't stop you believing what you want to believe or living the life you want to lead. Effectively, get over it. Grow up, be an adult, and live your life. rather than what we do tend to say to people, and particularly it seems in schools, in my experience, is, oh, well, that person upset you and that person said something that you didn't quite understand and didn't make sense of the way you see things, so we'll get rid of him. He's the one at fault. Rather than saying, grow, develop, get some resilience, and if need be, argue back. That would have been fine if anyone had actually come and said to me, I think you're completely wrong and here's why. I would absolutely have listened and potentially have changed my mind if they'd come up with brilliant arguments, but they didn't even try. They didn't approach me.
A return to freedom of speech and common sense. Amen to that, Kamal.
Always the way on the Daily Tea podcast.
Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall, we wish you well with the next stage of your legal battle, and thank you so much for talking to us on the Daily Tea today.
My pleasure. Thank you.